Good morning. A happy Palm Sunday. We're not here at St. James by any definition a mega church. Truth be told, we're closer to being a micro church. We're not a big church, so I did not expect a huge throng for our worship on this Palm Sunday. Nothing like the crowd which lauded Jesus that day as he entered Jerusalem riding on the donkey being a sign that this king came in peace rather than riding a horse as befitted a warrior coming in a hostile takeover. Now, I didn't expect a crowd, but neither did I expect to be addressing nothing but a tiny little microphone and camera on my computer. But life, as the saying goes, is what happens while you're making other plans. Sitting behind locked doors for fear of what we might catch from others or what we might spread to others, we are, at least apparently, pretty much alone. This is probably not what any of us hoped for. It is not what we expected. These days, we only go out for necessities, for groceries, medical care, to grab some food to go, and a few other items on a short list. What's included on that list is not entirely clear. Is hope on that list? Is hope a necessity? I think it is. When hope is gone, we languish. Languish is one of those old-fashioned words, but its meaning is as current as ever. Without hope, we just cannot go on. Not on a voluntary level, we have no reason. Not even on an involuntary level. Those deprived of hope, those in despair, lose even their immunity to disease, as well as their resilience in the face of outrageous fortune. Without hope, we languish, we wither, we pine away. Call it depression, if you will, call it despair. It comes to the same thing. Hope is what brought the crowd out that day to greet Jesus of Nazareth. Hosannas and palms, greetings and joyful noises were expressions of the hope they found in this man. Now, it wasn't the leaders sitting in the best seats of power who hoped in Jesus. It was those who, as we might say, were in the cheap seats of life, or those with no seats at all. Those on the street who seemed destined to stay there on the street. They were people who had nowhere to lay their heads, no prospects of improvement under the prevailing conditions. They needed hope, and in Jesus they found it. But their hope was not what they expected. Well, what was it that they expected? I can't say exactly. Expectations probably differed from person to person. Some may have expected that this son of David would deal with the oppressive secular powers, or others that he might deal with the religious powers that were entrenched. But this much is safe to say, they were not cheering because they expected what was actually going to happen. That after challenging the religious authorities, Jesus would be arrested, condemned, delivered to secular authorities to be flogged, beaten, crucified, and killed. The hope was not what they expected. So was their hope therefore false? Well, I say no. Their hope was in Jesus, even though what happened, and for that matter Jesus himself, were not what they expected. It seems to me that this is often the case. Hope is not what we expect. Does that make any sense? I mean, aren't hope and expectation the same thing? Oh, of course, we don't mean our pessimistic expectations. We mean our happy, optimistic expectations. Isn't my hope the same as my bright expectations? Well, that's often how we use the words. And I don't mean to quibble over mere words, but here I need to draw a distinction. By hope, I mean the prospect that the predicaments, pains, sufferings that plague us will pass away, and blessing, happiness, and joy will prevail. By expectation, I mean the specific images we hold of how that hope will come to pass. Lord, let my cry come unto thee is a common refrain of psalms and prayers. Lord, I am sinking under the waves of catastrophe. Please save me. There is no faithful heart that has not known that sentiment. Hope is trust that God hears, that God cares, and that God has not only the will, but the ability to answer our prayer. But most of us don't stop there at that hope. Most of us go beyond that point. Without even trying to, we specify, at least in our imaginations, exactly how God is supposed to do that, the course of action we expect him to take. We love to give God advice, instructions detailing how our calamities are to be solved, how our needs are to be fulfilled. I think of the Janis Joplin song, where the singer plainly feels that all her friends are woefully better off than she is because they all have Porsches. Her problem is the feeling of being looked down on, left out. Her hope is praying to the Lord, at least in the song, but her expectations specify the remedy. Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? Now, we've all been there. In our way, we probably, in our expectations, have in mind the color of the car, its special features. In our imaginations, we already savor that new car smell. But maybe it's not a Mercedes that arrives. That's expectation. You may have noticed that expectations almost never work out, at least not as expected, not completely. To have an expectation is to invite being surprised and perhaps disappointed, perhaps even devastated. Consider Jesus' disciples. Of the 12, only one of them could bear to even be present at the foot of Jesus' cross just days after the triumphant parade into the city on Palm Sunday. Talk about isolation. On that cross, Jesus felt isolated even from God, abandoned, betrayed, socially distanced to the extent that one of his BFFs denied 3 times even knowing him, and another supposed friend had betrayed him. Some clever person advised that we should all expect nothing and accept everything. Well, it sounds like good advice, but I suspect our human minds are made so that we cannot abstain from having expectations, even if we want to. Efforts to avoid expectations are like trying to not think of pink elephants. We spin images spontaneously, effortlessly, almost instantaneously, out of our hopes and fears, long, long before we could make any deliberate effort to suppress those expectations. We will have expectations true, but we are not required to trust them, nor are we wise to rely on them. Expectations are not reliable. Hope, on the other hand, is essential. And if that hope centers on God, then it is trustworthy. Hope is not so much about how as it is about who. How we expect that things might work out is an interesting speculation. But who we trust is what's essential. My expectation of what it is that God will do is a sheer speculation. Whereas my trust that God is the one who has the love and who has the power, who is the one upon whom I can rely, that's reliable. That is trustworthy. The way to hope's fulfillment is not what we've envisioned. The way may be a real roller coaster ride. It may pass through shadows and valleys, even the valley of the shadow of death. But the shepherd is with us. His strength and his correction comforts us. And on the other side of that cross-shaped shadow, we find the refreshment of the garden where the stone is rolled away and our risen Lord meets us in the dawning hours of his eternal day. There we are not alone. And despite appearances, none of us are alone today wherever we are. We are not alone. We are with our shepherd. And through him, we are also with all of his flock. That flock is not small. It is beyond counting. And in the love of Christ, no one can separate us from them, from him, or from each other. Amen.